Hi guys, welcome back. I am welcoming you back to a couple of spaces where this recording will be. One will go up on my YouTube channel as the normal Friday video, but the audio for this will also go up on my newly launched Beyond Body podcast. The reason I want to do that going forward and why you'll now be enjoying this podcast is because there are so many videos that I do which are a bit more long form, which, include talking to amazing people like our guest today. And I want you to be able to access it in all kinds of areas. When I make recommendations to clients about ways to self-soothe, about ways to stay connected to recovery and the community, podcast comes up a lot. And I used to believe, maybe I was just meant to create recovery content or, the kind of content that I create on YouTube was just meant to stay there. But I have so much to say and so many amazing colleagues who I can talk to and share with you, and stories of full recovery and hope that can work across so many different mediums. So there'll be videos which are just videos, there will be podcast episodes which are just podcast episodes, and there will be some which cross over. So if you are new here to the podcast, or if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure that you come and subscribe, give us a rating so that more people can find what we're talking about. There will also already be about 6 episodes for podcast episodes and YouTube videos that I have done previously, some with Carolyn Costin, one with my former client Monica, who shared her story of full recovery and now being pregnant. And they're not edited as podcast episodes. The intro is just the video intro, but I hope that you can go back and enjoy those now in audio form. On to today's episode of the podcast, or the video that you're watching. We're going to be speaking to Carolyn Costin, who has been on the channel before. Carolyn is an expert in the field of eating disorder recovery. She is recovered herself, and she is the reason why I'm a coach, why I'm a CCI coach specifically, because she runs the Carolyn Costin Institute, where coaches can become accredited to go out and work with clients. So today we're going to be talking about the skill which in my work as a coach, but also in my recovery, was probably the most powerful tool. It's the reason why it's one of my most successful workshops. It's the reason why it's the first thing that I start to approach with clients, is this healthy self, eating disorder self dialoguing skill. So we're going to go into the history of the skill, how Carolyn came up with it within her own recovery, mind you, without any formal treatment. She didn't have a therapist, a dietitian. She never went inpatient, because none of those things really existed. She had to navigate this on her own, and this is one of the skills she came up with, which, combined with her education and clinical experience, she's seen over the years how powerful it has been for others as well. And I now have the privilege of seeing how powerful it is with my own clients and workshop attendees. I hope you enjoy our chat. A huge thank you to Carolyn, as always. She will be back. We love doing these together. Any chance to chat to Carolyn, I will take it, recorded or otherwise. But enjoy the podcast episode or the video, however you're getting this. Have it both ways. Watch it and then listen to it. Listen to it while you watch it. We love the options. We love variety. So thank you so much, guys, and I'll see you next week. So Carolyn, thank you so much for coming back and chatting to us today. I know our initial chat on my channel was so well received, and people really connected with not just the idea of coaching, but, wanting to be coaches. I had an influx of people asking even more questions about some of the stuff that we touched on, particularly some of the healthy self, eating disorder self stuff that we were talking about and that I talk about, but have never really gone in depth with. And if there's anybody who I would ever want to talk about this skill, it would be you, because you were
done it for so many years.
That's right. And it really, the reason I love this skill so much is because not only have I observed from a coaching perspective what a difference it makes, and that it's the most powerful tool I've ever been able to teach anybody, but when I was going through recovery, I found myself doing this. This is where all my videos came from. I would talk to myself and have this back and forth. So then when I was reading your work, it made total sense, but you put it in a framework which was actionable and accessible for people, and all these neat tricks to be able to get this skill going. So if somebody wasn't aware of the healthy self, eating disorder self concept and getting those things talking to each other, how would you describe it to somebody? How would you introduce the idea of this concept?
Well, first, it depends on who I'm introducing it to, because I first want to say that when I'm working with clients, as you know, I usually wait for them to bring up something, and they will,
Yeah.
that is what I call a window in. So if a client says, I really wanted to do all those things we talked about last week, and I had all these good intentions, and I really felt, good about what I was going to do at the meal. But I sat down and looked at the pizza, and all of a sudden, a part of me just kind of freaked out and I couldn't do it.
Hmm.
Then that would be a natural inclination to say, so there's a part of you that agreed with me in session that you want to get better, you want to eat the pizza, but there's another part that just sort of takes over in the moment and says, oh, no, no, you don't.
Mm.
That's what I call the healthy self and the eating disorder self.
Mm.
Or if someone says, I tell myself I'm going to stop binging, and then I find myself at the refrigerator binging at night. I say, isn't that interesting? Because you tell yourself, when you say that, I tell myself, there's a part of you doing the telling and a part of you doing the listening, you know?
Yeah.
So you tell yourself, what does yourself, that part you're talking to, say back? So usually I wait for a window in, but the concept is that we're all born with this healthy core self inside. And for a variety of reasons, and we can talk about those, but a lot of different vulnerabilities and risk factors, over time, some people develop what I call an eating disorder self.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is it has a whole different way of thinking and acting and behaving that is different. It's kind of split off because it's different from what the person would do if they were treating their best friend, or if they were watching a 9-year-old kid, babysitting. They would never talk to them, tell them the things, have them eat the way they eat. And so generally I can bring it out in people by saying, look, there's a part of you that either knows better or knows that you would like to do it differently, or would tell a 9-year-old child differently, but you're not telling that yourself. And
Mhm.
so the goal here is to strengthen your healthy self, strengthen it back, because that's the part of you that's going to heal the eating disorder self.
Yes. I will often say to clients when they're saying, but it works and it makes me feel better. And, is it so bad if it makes me feel better? And I say, well, I'm not going to take away from you that that's how it feels for sure. But in all the times that you've had loved ones come to you and say, oh my God, I've had a terrible day. I feel so anxious and I just feel so uncomfortable. Or if they even say, I don't like my body and I want to change it. And if I could just change it, I'd be happy. How many times have you responded with, I have the best idea. Here's all these eating disorder behaviors you could use. And
Right.
they're like, no, absolutely not. But when they come across things like skill sets or a movie or a book that they've loved, you tell your loved ones about it. You want them to enjoy it and benefit from it. Why is this the one thing you're so convinced it works for you, but you don't recommend it to other
Yeah.
people? So there's
Yeah.
the disconnect. So what's the gap? Why for you, but not for anyone else?
And that's the real work,
Mm.
right? Is why can you bring it out for other people but not for yourself?
Mm.
And I think it's important to make the difference between externalization, because a lot of people, when they first hear me talking about eating disorder self, healthy self, think that I'm doing externalization. And the difference is, when you externalize something, you say it's outside of you,
Mhm.
and you talk to the eating disorder. You don't say, I have an eating disorder self that's a part of me.
Mm.
And the reason I think that's important is that I've seen clients who came with a background of having done some externalization work, and I understand it, and trying to separate, from the illness. I understand it. I think there's some good aspects to it. The real problem, I think, is well, there's two. The first one is that people will start to say things like, my eating disorder made me do it.
Yep.
It's like, where's the locus of control here? Where's the
Mhm.
responsibility? And I always rephrase that and say, no, a part of you made you do it.
Mhm.
And you can get back control over that part. When you say my eating disorder made me do it, what is that, some alien entity that landed from outer space? It's not. This has been grown and developed inside of you. When someone says, well, it's more powerful than I am, with my philosophy, I mean, I can say it can't possibly be more powerful than you are, because you give it its power.
Hmm.
So the ultimately, and then the last thing I want to point out is that ultimately, in externalization, you're trying to get rid of it. You know,
Yes.
you're bad, you've ruined my life. And in this philosophy, it's more you integrate back into a whole person. You get rid of the eating disorder behaviors, of course, you're trying to get rid of the behaviors. But what you do with this part of yourself that developed the need for the behaviors, you want to learn from it. You want to have a relationship with it.
Mm.
You want it to integrate back so you're not two split off parts anymore. You're one whole self. And that part of you that used to have the eating disorder behaviors is still there as an alarm system or a signal when things need to be attended to or you need to pay attention to something.
Yes, that's why that's one of the activities I love doing with clients is the traits as assets or liabilities, because the traits help you to sort of be able to identify those red flags. That if you do have a, more anxious temperament, or you are prone to black and white thinking or perfectionism, or then you can kind of be on the lookout for the traits before they spiral into something that's out of control or
Yeah.
being used for negative outcomes.
Yeah, because like for example, the trait of perfectionism is your healthy self using that and having it so that you clean your house or that you do well on a test, or is your eating disorder self using that trait and having it be that you want to have the perfect no fat
Hmm.
calories in your diet, or you know what I mean, you want to run farther today than you did yesterday. So yeah, our temperament can be mitigated. We can get a little bit better at our trait, perfectionistic traits, for example, but it doesn't really go away. So we have to learn, how do we best use our traits for the good?
Mm,
You know,
yeah. The traits are not the problem. It's how they're being used and being able to make sure.
right,
It's sort of like I still have a critical self, as we all do, not an eating disorder self. So I still use healthy self. I still have to be on the lookout
right.
for my patterns of thinking or certain habits that I have, or I'm not great at help seeking. So as soon as I get that inclination to isolate and not seek help, I go, red flag, now I have to seek help.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, I people tell me all the time that this concept, eating disorder self, healthy self, can be um, extrapolated into all kinds of other things in life.
Absolutely. It is a life skill. And it is, it's because so much of what people fear about recovering is that the world is scary and the world can't be controlled. So I can control all this stuff and have my rigidities and routines. And even if it's horrible, it's predictable. The world is unpredictable.
Yeah,
And, you're not in control. The eating disorder is in control. But no, you can't control the world. The only thing you can control is what it's like to live up here, and that's going to go beyond your eating disorder. That's being able
yeah.
to manage and navigate. I remember I sent you an email late last year. Obviously, like I'd lost dad, then there were bushfires, and then lost gran, and it was just this
Oh
7 months
yeah.
of just disaster, literal natural disaster in some way. And I remember I said to you, um, these skills have carried me through this time, everything I learned in my recovery. And I know without a doubt that I'm fully recovered, because if all of this hasn't knocked me down, then nothing
Right,
possibly could. But it
right.
was also, it's not just I'm fully recovered and that's the end of my self development. It was what helped me recover also keeps me healthy and sane and strong. And this, how I talk to myself and monitoring what it's like up here, is without a doubt the best life skill I think I've ever adopted.
That's nice to know. Yeah,
Yeah.
it helps me too. I mean, I always ask myself, just like I ask my clients, what are you telling yourself?
Yeah.
Because that's what happens. We tell ourselves things. And I think it's empowering to really realize that the battle is between you and you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, you need help and guidance and everything to make that healthy self stronger. But knowing that it's in within you and you, it's not. And I always tell people, no one else is going to take this away from you.
No.
Only you are going to be able to do it. But the good news is you can. We just
Yeah.
need to strengthen that healthy self. And then the book, of course, has all kinds of things from a simple thing like write some statements down that your eating disorder self tells you, like you can't eat that, or you can't eat anything after it gets dark, or
Mm.
you have to purge everything you eat if it's over a certain amount of calories, or whatever the thought is,
Mm-hmm.
and then write back to it. What would you say back? And if the person says, I don't know, because a lot of times they're kind of, deer in the
Yeah.
headlights when I first say that.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody else
Mm-hmm.
who said that? What would you say to somebody else who says, I can't eat after dark? It's interesting because rarely do I have someone that can't come up with a healthy self statement. Sometimes people need a little help and encouragement to get them going. But once they realize um, what I'm talking about and how they
Mm-hmm.
can do it. And I had the weirdest exchange today
Yeah.
where a coach actually sent me this thing and said, what if I have a client, she has anorexia nervosa, and she says, and she wants to purge when she eats, let's say it was ice cream. I don't remember what it was.
Mm.
And I asked her, well, what would you tell a little 9-year-old girl if she said she wanted to purge when she ate ice cream? And she said, I don't know what to do because my client said I'd tell her to purge it. So, you know what I said? Two important things. The first one is I'd tell her I don't believe her
Yes.
because I don't
Exactly
really,
what I thought. Yeah.
sometimes people do that just
Yeah.
because they don't want to get trapped.
Mm-hmm.
They can almost feel that they're
Yeah.
about to get trapped in something and they don't want to get trapped. And I said, I would tell her I don't believe her. I don't believe she'd tell a 9-year-old girl to purge if she had ice cream. But if she insists that she really would tell her, then this has gone beyond a coaching client. This is
Mm-hmm.
someone who's pretty distressed.
Yes.
And if she's telling 9-year-olds to throw up their ice cream, so she probably needs a higher level of care. And I really, I mean, really, that's twice in how many years I've been doing this, 40 some years I've been doing this work. Usually people will find that healthy self in there, and you can help them, though. You can do dialogues, coaches can do dialogues with them, or therapist, or whoever, to get it stronger and stronger.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it is confronting for people. I warn people that this is going to be uncomfortable. It's cognitive dissonance. You've got one fact or thought in your head and two completely different belief systems around it that contradict each other. I often say it's like you think you're living alone and then suddenly someone tells you you've had a roommate the whole time and you guys have to figure out how to live together. And the other roommate is, not a great roommate. And you've suddenly got to cohabitate and you've got to discuss things. And if a decision's going to be made, then you now have to have a conversation about it. And that's really uncomfortable for people. And I haven't had that level of resistance, but I have had where I know they're saying something because, like you said, they're getting trapped because there's clearly an instinct. They're going, if I do this, I'm going to prove eating disorder wrong. And then I have to do the thing I don't want to do.
You can almost see the wheels turning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, don't go there. Don't make me do this. But like you said, it's about readiness as well, and just where people are. Sometimes it's different things at different times for different people. It just might be they're not quite ready to go there yet.
And, generally what you'll find is that people with anorexia nervosa are the least likely to grab onto the concept right away.
Yeah.
Because they feel like, what are you taking away? And this is just me, and this is who I am, And whereas you find people with bulimia or binge eating disorder are much more like, oh yeah, I got this monster part that takes over. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They're motivated to change those behaviors and get rid of that monster part, I go, oh yeah, that's what we call the eating disorder self. But it just has monstrous behaviors. It's actually trying to do something adaptive, it's trying to sort out something here. And so for people with anorexia, that's more so I use a lot what would you do with a kid, or what would you tell somebody else, or what would you have me eat, which is a great one to use.
Yeah.
What
would you serve me? When they're like, how many chips am I meant to have? I'm like, well, what if I asked you to give me some chips? And they're like, oh no, I wouldn't give you what I give myself.
Yeah. And why not? And then always comes the question of why not?
Yeah.
And just knowing that, once you were a whole person, and over time you develop this split off sort of ego state. It's not a whole other personality, it's an ego state. We're not saying you're dissociative or schizophrenic or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But it's sort of split off. And what's interesting about integration is, and you've probably noticed this working with clients, there's no um, specific thing we do to integrate. It's as the healthy self gets stronger and stronger, the eating disorder self fades, because the healthy part of you is just kind of living its life and saying, no, I don't want to do that, or choosing something off the menu without reading the calories or whatever. And over time, it's almost like you look and go, oh, that part's not talking to me anymore. It's faded. Once it becomes unnecessary, it dissolves back into your core self, and then you're just a whole person again. So there's no like integration ceremony or the day you were integrated.
Amputation of
It
eating
just
disorder.
happened. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because I think
And
that's,
I think people
yeah.
would like that. I
Yeah.
think people would like that. Let me just, can't I just, amputate it? But, what happens in treatment centers all too often is they're just so focused on the behaviors, like getting the person to gain the weight or whatever. And there's no internal shift. The
Yeah.
healthy self has not gotten any stronger. In fact, the eating disorder self is like, oh, I'll show you. You can put this weight on in treatment. I'll get out of here and I'm going to just take things back into my own hands. So you constantly have to be looking for that. And you
Yeah.
constantly have to be working on goals where you're really collaborating with the client who's a very involved in the process.
Yeah. And I think that's why I love your approach. And, I was running a workshop a couple of weeks ago with someone who's been in and out of treatment since, they were 7, and they've had their eating disorder for about 40 years now. And she said, this is the first time I've come across a compassionate approach where it wasn't you versus us. It was you with the healthy self, and responding to the eating disorder self,
Yeah.
and empowering us and showing, because, I could sense with this person, there was resistance where it was, oh, this isn't going to work. Like everything else hasn't worked, and
Oh,
you
exactly.
can't make me. And I just start from, not only will I not make you, I can't make you. So if this looks like something you want to try, great, I'm here, but there's nothing I can do. I can, like you said, you can get people to put the weight on, you can, stop them from using behaviors for a period of time, but that just takes the onus off them. It disempowers them. It's just, well,
I mean, it's so sad, isn't it?
yeah.
That's so sad that that's still happening. And, if you don't have collaboration, I think you don't really have anything.
Yeah.
You have compliance. You don't have a commitment to change. You just have compliance under that monitoring or supervision or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, to me, it's aligning with the person and setting small goals that they can tolerate. It is a compassionate thing, and it is you get to have this thing if you really want it. I'm going to show you another side. I'm going to show you a way to get that part of you back in control that you would show to anyone else.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes I don't know if I did this with you or you've seen me do this, but a lot of times I'm talking to coaches or therapists about, you don't even have to use those words, healthy self, eating disorder self. In fact, a lot of times new coaches or new therapists start overusing it, or parents who I teach this concept to will start overusing it. Well, your eating disorder self, just that, or your eating disorder, your healthy self. I think it's important to sometimes just to say, hey, part of you wants to stop and part of you doesn't. Because if you use the term too much, it starts sounding a little too, too much like jargon and too removed. And, so sometimes I just say, look, there's a part of you. What about the part of you that came into my office and said you wanted to stop binging? Then last night you were binging again. Let's talk about, the battle is those two parts. We better get them talking to each other.
Yeah, they got to be in the same room at the same time.
Which is what all those assignments are about, you know?
Yeah. So this concept that, because I've heard you talk about this, obviously in our last chat, we touched on the fact that, you didn't go to treatment, you didn't have a therapist, you didn't have someone providing this framework and these skills for you, but this is something that you did, or that you tapped into, that it was you versus you. How did that, given you didn't have a framework, you didn't have a workbook, you didn't have someone explaining
Yeah,
this to you,
I know.
how did you figure out this was the way to go?
Well, I remember exactly when it started.
Yeah.
I remember it, and I've told this story a few times. I was in college, and I was pretty bad, with my anorexia, and it just kind of got worse my first couple of years of college. And I was on my way to a Christmas party,
Mm.
and I was in the car, and I was saying to myself, because I heard, well, this is what I said. When you get to the party, you're not going to have any cookies, any candy. You're not going to have anything. Just don't have it. And then, strangely enough, another part of me, voice, whatever you want to call it, said, that's easy for you. You can just go in there and not have it. What would really show you have self-discipline is to go in and have a cookie. And then immediately I went, oh, you're just trying to give me excuse to eat cookies. You're just trying to get me to eat cookies. And all of a sudden, I'm having this full-on dialogue with myself in a car with my friends who have no idea this is going on.
Yeah.
And I realized, oh my God, I have developed these two parts of myself, and they both have a different way of viewing the world and blah, blah, blah. So I started exploring that just in my own self, and I started doing a lot of reading and took some courses. And this is going to sound weird in the beginning on Buddhism, and I was taking a lot of philosophy, and I wanted to learn this thing between the ego, chattering mind, and your core, soul self.
Yeah, the
which
wise,
isn't
calm mind.
Yes.
Mm.
Which isn't exactly the same thing as eating disorder self, healthy self, but it did help me see about separating yourself from this chatter, and that you are not the chatter. You're not your thoughts and feelings. You're this inner essence underneath. So that, combined with me having this dialogue with myself, it wasn't till years later. I became a high school teacher for a while, and then I started a private practice. And it was in my private practice when I got my first few referrals for people with eating disorders, because people in my city were like, this girl has that thing you had, so will you see her? And I just started talking about this concept. What are you telling yourself? What do you hear yourself? Write down. What do you say? What are you thinking right before you binge, for example? What do you want to say? And it's interesting, because the reason that I want people to do that is I want them to have access to the part of them that's binging. Because someone who comes in your office, or you're having session with, who's saying, I hate binging and I just feel really uncomfortable, I'm out of control with food, and then they do it the next night. So, I feel like it's so obvious to me to say, so there's these two parts. One, there's something about you that wants to binge. I remember saying that to a client so many years ago, and her saying, basically feeling upset with me, like, how dare you say I like to binge, or I want something out of it, or a part of me wants it. And I was like, well, I mean, we don't continue to do things that a part of us isn't.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So having the person
true.
write down all your thoughts before a binge, if nothing else, they're getting in touch with that eating disorder self that they really are not talking to any other parts of the day. So if you write all your thoughts and feelings down, bring it into me, and here's this raging voice, I'm going to eat whatever I want, and I'm going to have this and this and this, and nobody can stop me. And I go, wow, she never came to session.
Who's this person?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the next step is, what do you want to say to her? Because she wants to go for it. What do you want to say to her? Because that's a part of you. And I mean, to me, I think the work is makes people really feel like, okay, I can begin to grasp, and then I get further. Well, you saw the stages, all the stages of being recovered. Or first you don't quite even know you have these two selves, or you might know, but you don't pay much attention to it. And then you start realizing that you can have dialogue and have communication between these parts. Then you start doing things to strengthen the healthy self. And it's not always winning, you know. The battles are sometimes pretty ferocious, as you know,
Yeah.
people going back and forth. And then the healthy self will start to get stronger. And then there comes a point, and this is a very important point, where the healthy self is pretty strong. It's holding you back from doing the symptoms. You can talk yourself out of it. But a lot of people think that's the end. In fact, a lot of treatment providers, insurance companies here in the US, you know, it's like, okay, well, you're not engaging in the symptoms, you know, okay, you're
All
good.
done. Yeah.
And that's when the person's like, but every day I'm thinking about it.
Hmm.
I don't like my body. I'm troubled by the weight. I might not be engaging in the symptoms, but if I have to stay like this, hyper vigilant,
What a
constantly on guard,
horrible, it's such a bad deal. Like I
yeah,
told you that happened to me 3 years in, and I was
yeah,
like, this sucks. I don't want to do this forever.
not worth it. It's not worth.
No, it's exhausting.
So I think we have a responsibility when we learn about these steps and everything to tell people, look, you're going to get to this place where you, maybe other people think that you're well, and you probably think you should be because you don't have the behaviors. That's not it. It goes past that part, past that, till then you don't have the desires anymore. You don't have the conflict. You're not white knuckling it one day at a time, like they say all the time in AA, you know,
Yeah.
in the 12 step, you know, one day at a time. And I just don't feel, do you feel like you have to recover one day at a time?
No, I did. And it almost sent me back over the edge because I'd been told by my wonderful psychologist who, you know, helped to save my life in so many ways, but I was told it's forever. You're going to be doing this forever.
That's what they think. That's
And
what,
because I'm a perfectionist, I was like, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to really do it. So I went full steam
yeah,
and I was burnt out. I was exhausted. And all my family were, it's almost been 3 years. This is amazing. And I was like, is it? I
yeah,
don't feel that great about it. I don't feel like
right.
celebrating because I'm so exhausted. And this just seems like a really bad deal. That's when I found you. That was the first I'd heard of full recovery because I made a video about it and people were saying, no, full recovery is possible. Have you heard of this? Have you seen this? And I'd never heard of it. And I think I'd probably at that
Ah,
point been fully recovered for probably about 12 months and still white knuckling it in a performative way because that's what I thought I had to do.
yeah, it's so sad.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful that you kind of spread the word about it, you know.
Mm.
I mean, it's a lot of people are listening and hearing and realizing that it actually is possible.
Mm.
And I think it's sad when people get to that point and feel like if this is what recovery is, it just feels too bad.
Yeah.
So I'm always telling people I wouldn't do this work if I thought that's what it was. I
Yeah.
wouldn't set everybody up to get to this place where you have like half a life, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
still miserable.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, because of the genetics, you know, that's one of the reasons why they say, you know, you have this illness that you have to manage the rest of your life. Part of it is because since there's some genetic predisposition that we've discovered for certain of these illnesses. But what I think is so silly about that is, you know, my genes are the same. You know, your genetics, just like those traits we talked about earlier,
Yes.
the genetics stay the same, but the eating disorder is gone. It doesn't mean that I recovered from my genetic vulnerabilities. You
Mm.
know, I tend to be the anxious type. And I think, like we were talking about earlier, you still have your traits and you learn how to work with them and use them to your advantage, but you can be recovered from an eating disorder. And it's just so important to
Yeah,
keep
and I
on
think
saying
what I love about the dialoguing skill and the healthy self concept is it's that it teaches you that your point of intervention is a lot earlier than, you know, even getting to an eating disorder thought, right? That
yeah,
I love breaking it down for people in that event, thought, feeling, urge, action chain because they're trying to intervene at action stage. And you're
yeah,
like, you are trying to push back an army by that point. It is you alone trying to push everything back versus when an event comes up, your boss is awful to you, or, you know, somebody gets sick, you know, you have a tendency to react to that in a way which might not be very helpful. So you kind of intervene a bit earlier. You have ways of
yeah.
coping and managing and addressing the stuff right when it comes up rather than all of it getting out of control and then ending up with something chronic where, you know, you're just trying to hold it together. You're more aware of yourself. You're not
And I tell
passive.
people, you know, not to despair about that in the beginning, because sometimes they'll say, I don't know. I didn't even know it was coming. And then I found myself, wanting to binge and purge. And I say, you will.
Yeah.
The more you pay attention to this, first, you can start doing something like, if you can't write, let's just take a binge. If you can't write before the binge, write afterwards,
Yes.
immediately afterwards. Then I want to start getting you to be able to do it before.
Yeah.
Then I want you to be able to do it. What was happening about the hour when you have these rumblings and you're thinking about going to the store? And pretty
Planning.
soon you'll be able to find that you'll get aware of yourself and aware of your feelings in a way that you're not really aware of now.
Yeah. Earlier points of intervention, because I'll have clients, in fact, on this workshop that I was just doing this morning, somebody said, I just get to the point where eating disorder wins and I do it. And it's like, well, that's it. And I'm like, so what do you do the next time it comes up? And they're like, well, then I try again. I'm like, but you don't have any clues. You don't, if you experience it and eating disorder wins and you do the thing and then you dialogue, it's going to come back around again. These thoughts are cyclical. The patterns are cyclical.
Right.
So you're
That's
either
right.
more prepared or less
Yeah.
prepared the next time it happens.
Yeah.
Which one do you want to be? Because it's always going to follow the same pattern. It's going to say the same stuff. It's going to have the same feelings. So as you said, you just become better at dragging that earlier and earlier in the process. Because I'll say to clients when they say, oh, I got to binge and I tried to dialogue and I couldn't. And for me, because I had anorexia binge purge subtype, so my binges would have started days before in terms of the planning process. So I'm now days into this thought process.
And some people, a lot of people are like that.
Yeah. And then I meant to intervene after days and days of this build up. It's just not necessarily
so hard.
Exactly. So if I can get it a couple of days earlier and then earlier and earlier and earlier, and then know all my patterns, I'm less likely to sort of end up in that same action stage each time.
I think we have to work at trying to help people not feel like, because there are assignments and because there are these terms, eating disorder, self-healthy self, it can begin to seem a little, and I hate this word, but a gimmicky thing. It can begin to seem like, oh, this is homework and it's not going to work for me. I tried journaling and it doesn't work for me. I can't tell you how many people say that. And
I know, I was one of those people. I didn't think it worked.
This is not normal journaling. I'm not just saying go journal your feelings.
Yeah,
this is a very specific task where you are not in touch with your eating disorder self at all. You're not in touch with it. And the only way to begin to even have a dialogue with it or to get it under control again is to be in touch with it, to recognize it, to perceive it, So the first thing is we have to make you aware of it. And part of being aware of it is just tell me what it says. Yeah. Just tell me what that part of you says. Tell me all the thoughts and feelings you have about, even if it's how much you hate your body or all the things. I just let people just get it out, whatever it is that they say. They're often afraid to say everything that they think also because, and that's really sad too, because how do you get treated for something when you feel like you have to repress it and hide it? Oh, I don't want to tell that I'm thinking all those things. Like I'm eating this supplement right now and I'm just figuring out a way, how am I going to get rid of it? Whereas for me, most of the time, I can't say all the time, but the clients learn, they can tell me because I'm not using force to make them do anything, Even when I ran residential treatment, to move up the levels, I mean, it was sort of like a reward system in the sense that you got more freedoms and more responsibility the more your healthy self was in control. But that just makes sense.
Yeah.
Like what I would say to people is, look, as soon as I know that your healthy self is giving it a good go and giving it at least, 50-50, then you can come in the kitchen and start portioning your own food, for example. Or you can start, if your healthy self is really taking control and really dialoguing and really talking back to the eating disorder, you can start making your own meals. You can start doing more exercise. You can go out to a restaurant and have a pass. But why would I put you in that position if your eating disorder self was totally in control, like the day you walked in here? Why would I go put you in a position where it just gets to, wreak havoc with you? So it made sense to them,
Yeah. Yeah.
they could see the logic behind it.
Yeah. It's not punishment, it's logic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really had a problem with places that would, you don't eat your meal and then you don't get to go to the movie outing.
I
That's
know.
punishment.
Yes.
That's punishment, and it's controlling, and it just makes people feel bad, and it brings the us against them feature,
Yeah.
and it's not a logical consequence. A logical consequence is more like, if you don't eat your meal, then you can't go work out with the fitness trainer with everybody else because you haven't got the calories in,
Yeah. It's not safe.
So I always tried to make it be, a logical, progressive consequence kind of thing.
Yeah. And because obviously your approach is the compassionate approach, um, and there are those programs which are more punitive, because I've seen it, I've had clients come to me where there's just no trust, there's just such a reluctance to trust, and there's such a reluctance to kind of take ownership of their recovery, where this is more of an empowering, like, this is me and your healthy self working together. So have you seen that it's hard to get people to trust and to open up and to take this on purely because they've been in a sort of cycle of treatment where it's
Oh
us
yeah.
versus you?
Yeah, when I was running Montanita, there were so many times where we would be ready to do an admission of a new client, and I would see the treatment history and I would say, oh, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
Because someone who's had so much treatment has been in this thing where, like I was saying before, the internal shift hasn't happened. It's almost, it's just so hard on them because they feel like, here's what it's like. When I was on my own, it's eating disorder rules that I have to follow. When I'm in treatment, now I'm following treatment rules.
Mm.
And I always say to people, what about your rules?
Yeah.
That's what we need to grow here. That's
Yeah.
what we're strengthening, because I don't want you, when you're in treatment, just following the treatment rules, because when you go back home, you're not going to follow those rules. So now you go back to what? The eating disorder rules.
Mm.
When people want to have their life as some kind of semblance of order or
Yeah.
whatever. And so it's really about helping people establish, what do you want and how can we best help you to achieve it?
Mm.
And that's going to be helping you, one, agree to these goals, even if they're slow, very slow progress goals. And two, you being able to be the one to talk to that part of yourself. I will often, when a client says, I did this and this, and what do you, or they're waiting, what do you think? And I always want to say, what do you think?
Yes.
What would you
What does
say
your
about
healthy self
that?
think about that? Yeah. Yeah.
Because so many times we want to just jump in and tell people, this and that, and we know a lot, and especially if you've treated people for so long, and after 40 years, I still have to sit back and say, if I tell you what I'm thinking, your healthy self doesn't have a chance to practice.
Mm-hmm.
So you go first.
Mm.
you
Yeah,
know?
especially when they first start reaching out to you, like between sessions, and they're like, and this happened and
Yeah.
this happened, what do I do? And they get to
Yeah,
the point where
exactly.
they like, I don't want to text you because you're just going to tell me to do a dialogue or to do this, or what do I think? What would I tell someone else? How would I
Yeah.
soothe and distract somebody else? And I'm like, great, do that. Still reach out to me, but
Yeah.
tell me what you have to say, and then I can kind of help you if you get stuck, or you're trying something and it
And they
just
do
doesn't seem
get
to be
stuck.
working.
So
Yeah.
we do have to help them. I mean,
Yeah.
our role is still, uh, super important. This
Mhm.
support role, therapist role, coaching role, because they also, I think, need someone to be accountable to.
Yeah.
Like, look, I'm having this dialogue, or I always like to notice where people get stuck, because then we
Yes.
can spend some time
Yeah.
working on that stuck place. Well, oh, I don't have an answer when my eating disorder self says that.
Mm.
you know okay, well, let's come up with some answers,
Mm.
ones that you believe in, not some BS thing you're just making up, but
Yes.
something you
Yeah.
believe in.
Because one of
Because
the
sometimes people think that I just want them to come up with something, just anything,
something that
and
sounds
they
good.
say, yeah, and
Yeah.
that doesn't work.
No.
And I always say, no, I'm not buying it.
Mm.
Even if it's a tiny little bit and you can't muster out a lot, I want it to be something you feel is true. You would tell somebody else,
Mm.
and stick behind that because it's the truth.
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful things, there was that moment in the training where you were talking about truth without judgment. And I remember I was cooking. I went back and I rewound it about 5 times because I was like, that makes so much sense to me about what this role is, and also what the
Yes.
healthy self's role is.
Yes.
So I was talking to someone recently who was saying, I say this and it's powerful, and I go back and I try to say something as powerful as the eating disorder self, or something as knowledgeable. And I'm like, well, that's not the job of the healthy self. The whole job of the healthy self is to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't know, it's okay to say it doesn't know.
Yeah.
If you don't know what's going to happen to you in recovery and it's scary, say that it's scary. Say that you're scared. Say that you're unsure. And then try to figure out, what would I say to someone else who is scared and anxious? How would I take care of someone else who is experiencing this? You don't have to have all the answers. You need to be honest.
Yeah, sometimes I tell them, look, just even have the healthy self say, wow, I better talk to Carolyn about this one.
Yeah.
I mean, even if it just says that, it's
Yeah.
saying something and it's getting the last word. I always say, when you do dialogues, never let the eating disorder self have the last word.
Yeah.
Don't ever end with that part of you, being able to say the last thing.
Yeah. Like, I'll have clients who say, I'll read a dialogue and you just know where they're getting stuck, because it said, there's nothing wrong with my body and I love my body and I don't need to change it. And I just wrote back and highlighted, do you believe this? And they wrote back, no. And I said, well, that's where you
don't use it then.
Eating disorder
Don't
self
say
has
stuff
got
because you think you're supposed to say it, or
Yeah.
you think it's some treatment thing, or you think it's going to make me happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Make it
do that.
flexible. Say, I have evidence to say other people can be tolerant of their body image and get through this process. And I'm learning to believe that for myself.
Maybe you'll get there, and maybe that will be your truth. But if it's not, yeah, I'm so glad you get that. It's a part that slips up a little bit when people are trying to teach others how to do this. Sometimes that gets a little fuzzy because the person wants to write all these things and you look at it. Or alternatively, when the healthy self is really mean, and it's more a parental, you got to get your shit together, you got to do this and this and this, and that's not the way to act. And I went, wow, do you think if I talk to my clients like that, they'd stay around, So a lot of times that's how we can be guides and helping them step back and say, now, what would you really say?
And my favorite part of the process is when initially they're referring to the healthy self as the other self. And they're saying, well, I would say to the healthy self. And then the switch happens where the I is the healthy self and the other self is the eating disorder self. And you're like,
and it happens.
The wiring is in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a client go like this. This one's about this, and then it's shifted and it's back, it's so funny.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's so simple, really, isn't it? There's a lot of complexities to helping people to get there and helping people to strengthen it. And it can go slowly. That's okay. Step by step. But really, in so many ways, there's a simplicity about the concept. And I always say, if there was only one thing I could teach people, if I went in and there's a group of people and they had an eating disorder and they needed help, that's the one thing I would try to teach people, because I think it's empowering.
Yeah. And like you've already said, it's a life skill. So when I say to people, when they get a bit like, really, all this work for recovery, and I say, there are skills you will develop here that you will use forever. I remember I was about 28. So this was about 5 years ago, and I was a couple of years into recovery. And my mum said to me at the time, she said, you have learned things in 3 years, pushed to the wall and forced to, but you have learned things because it was an absolute necessity that you did it, that it has taken me decades to learn. There are just things that you have to.
I feel the same way.
Yeah. You have to really look at yourself and really examine yourself and really examine how you think and behave and react in your relationships and boundaries. And, some people go their whole lives never doing that, unfortunately.
I know. I mean, that's why some people don't get a little uncomfortable when I say this, but then I think my explanation is pretty good when I say that anorexia was my greatest teacher. because so many lessons had to be learned. I mean, including my whole connection with my soul and my soul self, and my journey into that part of the world, trying to understand who was this talking, chattering mind and all that,
Mm.
and so many other things. And there's some books I really like, and I talk about this. Thomas More wrote these books: Care of the Soul, The
Mm.
Reenchantment of Everyday Life, and then this one called Dark Nights of the Soul. And in Dark Nights of the Soul, he talks about, you know, that when you have something like a major illness, or even a car accident, or the loss of a loved one, or whatever, that there is this there's the opportunity. You wouldn't wish it on anybody, but there's the opportunity to sift through it for the gold you will find there.
Mm.
And that's what I think you were talking about, and that's certainly how I feel. And I think we both know a lot of people who are recovered who feel the same way. They're stronger in the places that used to be broken, you know.
Mm. Absolutely. Beautifully put. Thank you so much for this chat. I know that people are going to get so much out of it, and it's such a good thing for me to be able to point clients towards, and to get, that deeper explanation of where it came from, and why it's so important. And especially the lived experience component, I think changes things for people to say, this isn't something that just, somebody learned out of a textbook. This is something that, people who have been through it have used, and it's been a game changer for them. So they know more than just from observing, but going through it themselves. There is a reason I'm asking you to do this, like the video with Monica where she said, you made me do this every day and I didn't get it until I got it. So there's so much purpose to this.
I loved that she said that.
Yeah, it's a very honest chat. But
thank you for doing these, like you're in the generation where all this Zooming and podcasting and all this stuff comes a lot more natural for you than me. So of course I don't have a thing, a format or whatever, but I love participating. So I appreciate that you have me on.
Of course, the door is always open. Thank you so much, Carolyn.
We'll figure out something down the road to talk about, because we are, neither of us are at a loss for words ever.
That's so true. That is so true. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.